America is now under martial law. See how easy it is to manipulate people into embracing fascism by putting some bad guy in a turban on TV every day. You asked for it, you got it. Well, we all have to be patriotic now, right? And there's only one way to be patriotic, isn't there? Pledging allegiance to the war. How many of you have pledged allegiance to the war? The war against terrorism, abbreviated TWAT for all practical purposes. How many of you are glad we're kicking ass in Afghanistan? I heard initial cheers go up and then everybody caught themselves. Don't be afraid. Come out of the closet. Even though he stole the election, one of the saddest factors of this country is even though half the country doesn't vote, which is disgraceful enough, 1 in every 4 American adults went out and voted for George W. Bush. Be afraid. Be very afraid. Isn't it interesting that whenever somebody named Bush gets into the White House, many people die? I'd like to read a little statistic for you now from the April 2002 edition of Harper's Magazine. Every issue of Harper's has this page called the Harper's Index with all kinds of mind-blowing statistics on them. Here's one. Estimated amount of US dollars spent guarding our Mid-Eastern oil supply in the Persian Gulf. $50 billion. Estimated value of the crude oil coming out of the Persian Gulf, $19 billion. What is wrong with this picture? I don't like Osama bin Laden or Islamic fundamentalists either, especially the way they treat women, and I want to be safe from terrorism too. But I get equally frightened when somebody like George Bush comes out and says things like,
"You're either with us or with the terrorists."
Some choice. Where somehow we have to follow them clear over a cliff to a full-scale invasion of Iraq and burn every single bridge of goodwill we ever build in that part of the world, in Europe, and maybe even in this country as well. Now is the time to stand up and say, yo, we are not with Bush or the terrorists. And start asking the question, is what we're doing over there really the best way to solve this problem? Or will this short-term orgy of feel-good violence bring much bigger problems down the road? In 1991, Jimmy Carter publicly warned the last George Bush that his Gulf War would set back peace in Middle Eastern relations at least 20 years. Now what happens? Now what do we do? I fear a mass slaughter of innocent civilians already far greater than what went down at the World Trade Center with the clown prince of the Texas oil barons handed the keys to weapons of mass destruction. While Israel is being dragged down the toilet by its own Saddam Hussein, and his name is Ariel Sharon. I fear governments all over the world rounding up and attacking anybody who opposes their policies for any reason on the grounds that they are aiding terrorism. Kind of like the United States did when we locked up thousands of labor activists and immigrants in the 1920s for the crime of opposing World War I. And nobody has been more cynical about manipulating how upset we are and how fearful we are after what went down on September 11th and our sorrow for the victims and their families than the Bush administration themselves. Their bodies are barely cold in the ground, and Bush's people are already pissing on their memories.
In order to fight terrorism, we have to drill for oil in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge.
That'll show them. Just kill off all them caribou and all them bears and melt the tundra. And the oil, by the way, last time they were bringing this up, was earmarked for China. And right after September 11th, both houses of Congress passed a bill ordering 100 more tanker jets for the Air Force, right after the Air Force said they didn't need them. And Bush says that in order to fight terrorism, we have to give him alone so-called fast-track authority to ram through treaties like the Free Trade Agreement of the Americas that makes NAFTA and the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, the GATT treaty that gave us our lovely friends, the WTO, look nice by comparison. Free Trade Agreement of the Americas is designed to let any private company shake down any other country for sanctions anywhere North, South America, Caribbean, Central America. Only Castro isn't invited. Shake them down for blood money and sanctions for failure to privatize their water supply. You know, they tried that in Bolivia, and Bechtel raised the rates of the peasants up 300%, and people rioted in Cochabamba until Bechtel got driven out. So now Bechtel has gone to another obscure trade tribunal whose name I can't even remember, demanding that the Bolivian government be ordered to pay them $25 million in blood money. That's the scam. They also want to be able to go after people for failure to privatize the school system. And even now, under NAFTA, UPS, United Parcel Service, is suing the government of Canada for interfering with their profits by having their own postal service. That'll show the evil ones. And anybody who says this sort of globalization uber alles and signing over our constitutional rights and our sovereignty to corporations is somehow wrong and fights globalization, well, you oppose the corporate agenda, you must be a terrorist too. Wall Street Journal, Prime Minister of Italy, Silvio Berlusconi, who's kind of like a cross between Mussolini, the Godfather, and Ronald McDonald rolled into one. They all said that the people protesting in Seattle and in Geneva and Italy and other places caused the World Trade Center bombings and are therefore terrorists for fighting corporate rule. And people who come out and oppose it in this country sometimes have all kinds of hell to pay. Bill Maher, you'll notice politically incorrect, is not going to be on the air anymore. One of the things that took him down, it appears, was he said, I thought it was not only just a perfectly innocent remark, but very well taken, that yes, it was something to the effect of, yes, it was cowardly to be flying planes into those buildings in New York and killing all those innocent people. It's also cowardly to be shelling somebody else's country from missiles fired from 2,000 miles away. And Bill Maher's reward for that was sponsors pulled their ads out of politically incorrect, local station affiliates canceled the show, Bush's press secretary Ari Fleischer hopped on the bandwagon saying people have to watch what they say and watch what they do. Yeah. And stamping that down even further is Dick Cheney's wife, Lynn Cheney, who you haven't heard much about so far, but she's like the Tipper Gore of the academic world and has been that way for many, many years. For a while under Reagan-Bush regime number one, although I kind of call them the Reagan-Bush-Clinton regime when you look at their policy consistency over the years. Anyway, she was head of the National Endowment for the Humanities and began pulling grants for any project a school wanted that she deemed political. But of course, if it was beneficial to corporations or the right wing, then it was patriotically correct instead of politically correct, and it was okay. Well, now she's part of the American Council of Trustees and Alumni, who also had Joseph Lieberman on board for quite a while, who announced that the weakest link, yes, you are the weakest link, in the war on terrorism is college professors. and listed 117 unpatriotic acts that they thought didn't just warrant a few demerits and finger wagging from Lynn Cheney and Lieberman. No, they ought to all be fired for things like saying in a classroom at the University of Oregon that we need to understand the reasons for people's hatred of us in the Middle East. What makes these people so powerful is they sit on $3 billion in grant money to schools every year. So that's how they can influence what is taught in the schools. And meanwhile, all kinds of things are flying this way and that and flying under the radar screen, like the New York Times nonchalantly mentioning in an editorial, oh yeah, in the next 5 years we're going to double the size of the CIA. Great. They did such a wonderful job with such a conscientious approach the first time around. Let's have twice as much of them. And you may have noticed that the Bush administration is hell-bent on sealing government records right, left, and center. Nobody can read any of the papers from not only Bush's father's administration for some strange reason, but the Reagan administration too, because it might disclose some of the little nasty things they did then, I guess. And they also were hell-bent on sealing all the records of Cheney's meetings with executives from the Enron Corporation on how to solve the manufactured energy crisis that Enron and Ross Perot, among others, helped start in the first place. And the Democratic Party, true to form, has been totally spineless in truly pursuing just how horrific the Enron scandal and WorldCom, Adelphia, and the rest of them really is, and how many more there are to come. Instead, Mr. Law and Order, Attorney General John Ashcrack has given us the USA Patriot Act, which most of Congress didn't even bother to read. Only one senator voted against it in the Senate, meaning the other 49 Democrats, as well as the Republicans, did. Only 66 in the House as well. And look what we've done since then. Rounded up 5,000 people, locked them in prison for the crime of having a Middle Eastern last name or the wrong color skin or being in the wrong place at the right time. So now they say there's still 1,200 immigrants being held incommunicado somewhere for some reason. Who are they? Why are they there? Where are they? They won't tell us. Even Amnesty International has been able to find out a little and slapped us in the face with a report saying we were keeping a lot of these people in solitary confinement, in shackles, not allowing them to exercise, see a lawyer, call their family, nothing. And the FBI justifies this by saying, well, we had to round up all these people because this Al-Qaeda thing we somehow never quite noticed before is a mosaic. And we have to decide which of these people fit into the mosaic. And hey, if we get 50 informants out of these people, that's 50 more than we have now. In other words, you're yanked away from your family, you're thrown in chains and solitary for damn near close to a year now. You're suddenly going to want to narc for the FBI? Something doesn't make sense here. And Bushcroft says that we're going to have military tribunals now, anywhere in the world. Try anybody we think is a suspected terrorist or enemy of the United States, and if a few of the people on the tribunal vote to execute the person who's not allowed a lawyer or a defense or anything else, we just kill them. Have we done it already? Nobody knows. Can you imagine the outrage if Saddam Hussein or even Canada sent their army into this country and tried somebody they didn't happen to like for unspecified crimes against the state and killed them and then left town? How would we feel? How would the Bush mob feel, for that matter? And they define suspected terrorist as anybody who attempts to influence the policy of a government, doesn't say which one, by intimidation or coercion. Kind of like what we're trying to do to Iraq and the Palestinian people, among others. But that's such a wide umbrella, that could include peaceful sit-ins, marches, protests of the kind Earth First and the anti-globalization people are so good at. Are we going to drag in people for terrorism charges for daring to be seen in a cardboard turtle suit now? Boycotts could fall under this. The sort of pranks I have such a soft spot in my heart for could as well. The way it's written, you could be aiding a terrorist organization if some other charity you gave money to or helped out was named as a terrorist organization after the fact or was supposedly linked to another one or something. They tried this during Reagan-Bush regime #1, and the way the law was written then as now, it would have meant that if you'd given Nelson Mandela a ride to the airport after he talked to a basketball coliseum full of people about apartheid in South Africa, you could go to jail for aiding a terrorist, because up until almost the day Mandela was president of South Africa and the white regime was out, the CIA had his party, the African National Congress, on their list of terrorist organizations. Same as if you helped out CISPES or Witness for Peace or any of the people trying to stop all the death squad bloodbaths in Central America who had offices here that the FBI broke into, if that sounds familiar. Even if you do wind up one of our new prisoners of the war on terrorism, the Geneva Convention doesn't apply to our country anymore, just other countries and how they treat their prisoners. Therefore, we can take anybody we want out of Afghanistan and lock them in human-sized rat cages out in the sun in Guantanamo Bay in Cuba and leave them there until maybe someday we can think of what to do with them next. Again, how would we react if Muammar Gaddafi or somebody from Iran came in and took people out of this country and locked them in rat cages somewhere in the Persian Gulf? The really scary part of the Patriot Act that I wish the people in Congress would have read is that it now allows the FBI to come into anybody's home without a warrant anytime they want to. Search your place, go through your hard drive, see what you got on your computer, not even tell you they've been there, or then if you do know they've been there, they're going through your business records or something, and you tell somebody else, even a defense attorney, that they've been there, you can go to jail for that too. So says the Patriot Act. And if that's not enough, this just passed the House of Representatives by a landslide, the Cybersecurity Enhancement Act, which says that for so-called malicious hacking, you can go to prison for life. The Democrats are after our ass too here. That known friend of the common man, Senator Joe Biden of Delaware, has introduced the Reducing Americans' Vulnerability to Ecstasy, otherwise known as the RAVE Act, which means anybody who puts on an event where people are getting down and maybe getting high, failure to keep anybody from using or selling drugs, you can be fined $500,000 and go to jail for 20 years under this law. Better stick to molesting children and serial rape instead. House of Representatives, meanwhile, has the so-called Clean Up Act, where any event promoter who knows or ought to know anybody there is high on anything can go to jail for that. Does this mean if one person lights up a joint at Ozfest, Ozzy and Sharon Osbourne and their kids get locked up too? Or for that matter, what if somebody lights up some weed in the baseball stadium, or they catch Barry Bonds and the rest of them with steroids, gobbling them up down in the dressing room? Does the owner of the Giants go to jail too? That would be an interesting way to see how they enforce that law. And now, Ashcroft has announced that the FBI is going to go back to the kind of dirty spying techniques known as COINTELPRO, as if they ever abandoned it, where they used to infiltrate people like the Black Panthers and the Students for the Democratic Society, American Indian Movement, and try and get them to commit violent acts against each other and throw them all in jail. And all the corporate lackey newspapers in America are saying, oh, 85% of the American people think this is a wonderful idea. Congress thinks it's just a wonderful idea. Well, maybe a few more of them should know that in a courtroom in Oakland, California, Daryl Cherney and the estate of Judy Berry, two Earth First activists who at the time survived an assassination attempt against themselves when a bomb went off in Judy's car and damn near killed her at the time. She since died of breast cancer. 12 years later, finally, they nail the FBI and the US government for $4 million in damages for violating their civil rights. So the Bushcroft solution to that is just to make it all legal from now on. And the Ashcroft is saying that now they're going to start infiltrating churches, legitimate political organizations, anything they think might be terrorist. FBI's been walking into libraries and bookstores again, trying to shake down the people working there for lists of who checks out what books and rents what movies and all. Yeah. That's going on all over the place now. Even trickling down in local areas, too. The Denver cops got caught red-handed keeping files and sharing them with other agencies on as many as 10,000 people for the crime of attending an Amnesty International meeting or American Friends Service Committee or something like that. This is the same police department that had almost every black person between 14 and 23 or so on their list of suspected gang members. And the Clinton administration admitted they'd begun spying on a lot of the principal organizers of the protests in Seattle after it happened. Even here, BART trains, Bay Area Rapid Transit, the ones that go under the bay from San Francisco to Oakland, Berkeley, etc. So-called BART train cops, now to fight terrorism, they got dogs with them. In, up and down the train cars, drug-sniffing dogs, just in case they catch some terrorist with a doobie in their pocket they want to smoke when they get home. That'll show the evil ones for sure. And this has given people like Southwest Airlines, Northwest Airlines, Eli Lilly and Company, and others the excuse to start going back in their employees' records for over a decade or so, and anybody who even got a slap on the wrist for smoking some weed, fired. All in the name of protecting us from the evil ones, in the name of the new buzzy-wuzzy word, Homeland Security. Homeland Security. And who do we put in charge? This guy Tom Ridge, who every time I see a picture of him, the theme from Car 54, Where Are You, starts running through my head. I mean, the guy whose principal aim as governor seemed to be to execute Mumia Abu-Jamal, and he failed. So now, let's make him head of Homeland Security. And what do they offer us in Bushcroft world for Homeland Security? Operation Tips. Terrorist information and prevention system, where they want millions of amateur wannabe snitches. Whenever the mailman or the UPS driver or somebody at the bus station or something starts feeling a little tipsy, they can turn in anybody they want to Ashcroft for potentially terrorist-related activity. It's beginning to look a lot like 1984. Endless, endless war. Bush has said it, Cheney said it, Rumsfeld has said it. We don't know how long the war on terrorism will last. It might last 5 years. It might last 10 years. It could last our entire lifetime. God, this is an even better scam than Vietnam. Well, that's going to explain all these so-called advisors, military advisors we have sent into Colombia, as well as making them the biggest recipient of foreign and military aid besides Israel and Egypt, we say, to fight drugs. That's why we have to do this. Well, obviously it's to fight something else as well. Bush has now said he wants to have the Colombian military and therefore the death squad paramilitaries that they work hand in hand with to also be able to use the money we give them to kill guerrillas or indigenous people who attempt to interfere with oil pipelines they want to put through the rainforest. Then Bush, in his State of the Union address, comes out with Iran, Iraq, and North Korea form an axis of evil. He had not cleared that juvenile remark with anybody at the State Department at all. It just blew out of his mouth, kind of like Reagan's Star Wars fantasies. And all that's accomplished is it's totally undermined people who want a more moderate government in Iran that's not run by religious dictators, and we're making real progress there. Now people are going and running back to the mullahs and the ayatollahs because they're scared we're about to bomb them. South Korea, President Kim Dae-jung may have had his career shortened by Bush's little remark. He'd made more progress than anybody has in 50 years in breaking through to North Korea and trying to normalize relations. Now the North Koreans are slamming the doors in his face just like before because they're afraid that Bush and his barnyard friends are about to bomb them too. And sure enough, we then reveal people in the Pentagon with a little too much time on their hands have been drawing up plans to nuke not just the usual targets, but the seven dwarves are not just going to nuke Russia and China and North Korea. You never know when we might need to drop an atomic bomb on Syria or Libya or Iraq. Is Cuba in there too? I can't remember. No, that might blow and devalue real estate in Miami when it becomes radioactive. Can't do that. And as if we haven't learned already, here we are trying to stage coups in other countries. We tried to overthrow democratically elected President Hugo Chavez in Venezuela and replace him with a businessman we'd been meeting with steadily before it happened. It didn't work. So now we're trying to build up more and more people there to get rid of Chavez and put some other wannabe Pinochet in who will do Bush's bidding instead. And they were saying, well, now that we see how these people hide in these caves that we helped them build in Afghanistan, what we need are little trick-or-treat bag size backpack nukes. Little nuclear bombs that G.I. Joe could go up the mountain and roll into the cave and hopefully get all the way back down the mountain before the whole mountain blows up and it avalanches into the valley and maybe even triggers a quake on the other side of the valley. You know, after all, that last big one in Los Angeles was the same day as an underground nuclear test in Nevada. I always wondered about that. But anyway, how irresponsible is this? Little nuclear bombs, anything to save the nuclear bomb industry. How easy is one of those to steal? Even the Pentagon admits that if somebody did steal some of that or figure out how to make them, they'd have a 90% chance of bringing them back into the country and nuking us with them instead. Of course, one way to prevent that would be to not build them at all, but that doesn't seem to be the logic of Bush Incorporated. And if that isn't irresponsible enough, most irresponsible of all, they're saying to fight terrorists, we have to give Reagan his wet dream and Rumsfeld his windfall and put nuclear weapons in outer space. Star Wars, in other words. Even the spineless Democrats are saying, oh, well, maybe we better give it to them after all. Otherwise, we might look soft on terrorism. Space nukes wouldn't have prevented the bombings of the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. It wouldn't have worked. But maybe that's why space nuke toys were never meant to be a defensive weapon. Those are an offensive weapon. The Pentagon says they need them for full spectrum dominance, to protect us from any rogue nation at a time when even when you cross the Canadian border, you'll meet an awful lot of people who think the #1 rogue nation in the world today is the United States of America. Full spectrum dominance. It means anybody who does any rogue or potentially terrorist act, like asking Exxon to leave their indigenous lands or something, there's gonna be a laser beam from outer space that's gonna come down and fry your ass. But what happens if one of those toys malfunctions? Crashes back to Earth like the Russian space station Mir did not very long ago. Those things come back into the atmosphere and start burning up. They're going to blow. potentially scattering enough plutonium dust all over our atmosphere. After all, one tiny little speck is enough to give you radiation cancer and kill you. This could potentially kill every breathing creature on the planet. One of those Star Wars weapons malfunctioning scares the hell out of me, far more than Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden and big bad North Korea combined. And meanwhile, they're saying, oh yeah, we've also installed a shadow government of faceless bureaucrats in secret places who will be ready to run the country if anything should happen to our precious Bush administration. In a way, we might be better off with faceless bureaucrats than Cheney and Rumsfeld and the others who run Bush. But I think we've had a shadow government as long as I've been alive, and their names are Shell Oil, IBM, Microsoft, Sony, Disney, General Motors, General Dynamics. That is the shadow government. But not even that is enough for the Bush crowd. They're now saying that the International Criminal Court that Clinton signed off on, and that we've spent years all over the world trying to get this together to bring people like Milosevic and hopefully Pinochet and whoever was responsible for the slaughter in Rwanda and the others to trial, well, it doesn't apply to us. And we will invade any country that attempts to try an American in the International Criminal Court, which is going to be located in The Hague. So this means we're going to be invading Holland now, too. And we also said anybody who signs off on ratifying the treaty for the International Criminal Court, and 139 countries already have, they'll cut off their arms. And then Colin Powell, his congratulatory call to the first president of East Timor was, hey, if you sign on to the International Criminal Court, not one penny in foreign aid for you. And at the same time, with all these scares about terrorists, germ bombs lurking under every rock and bed, who torpedoed a worldwide treaty against manufacturing biological weapons? America pulled out, nuked the treaty, on the grounds that it, quote, did not protect U.S. interests. Specifically, it interfered with our desire to corner the market on bioterror weapons and the biotech industry in general, such as the Office of Naval Research in Arlington, Virginia, has been proposing creating genetically modified bugs they could make that would corrode roads, and they could eat up runways and eat up metal parts and lubricants and plastic and fuel. They call them anti-material biocatalysts. Trouble is, you let them out of the test tube or the bag and they eat up everything else in your enemy's country. Then what do you feed them? And if they're going to do this at Fort Detrick in Maryland, what happens if these bugs creep out like the monkey that was shot up with Ebola that got loose a few years ago? And again, this seems a little irresponsible to me to go into the Frankenbug business and all. And I fear for all the rising number of victims of racial repression against Arab Americans and immigrants of a certain skin color or religious faith. I go to Tallahassee, Florida, and just that week, some rootin' tootin' patriotic American drove his pickup truck through the front door of the local mosque. And last fall, right after 9/11, a guy in, I think it was Mesa, Arizona, outside of Phoenix, was opening his gas station for the first day of business, and somebody in the pickup truck did a drive-by and blew the guy's head off, killed him, because it had a turban on top. And he said as he was led away, I did this because I was standing up for America. And I also fear for what's going to happen to the veterans of this war on terrorism, too. I mean, a lot of people enlist in our armed forces thinking they're going to get job training or college money or an education, and instead they get sent into a war. And we have a great track record of waving our sword and pushing people around and killing thousands and thousands of people at the push of a button, but we have a piss-poor record of how we treat those veterans when they come home from wars, don't we? In San Francisco and so many other places, you see people holding up signs saying, "Homeless Vietnam vet will work for food." Regardless of whether you think as little of the Vietnam War as I do or not, that situation never should have happened. You won't even cop to all the people who got cancer and had kids with all kinds of wild birth defects because of exposure to Agent Orange in the Vietnam War, let alone how many more that happened to in Vietnam itself and still happens to in Vietnam because we never came back and cleaned up all the areas we poisoned with the Agent Orange. After all, it's not our fault. We had nothing to do with the problem. That's the way we treat people who came back with Gulf War syndrome, too. They come back and everybody's, "Oh, rah, rah, Gulf War, George Bush the First is great, support our troops." We didn't support the troops. Once they came down with Gulf War syndrome, we just said, "Fuck them," basically. Come down with blurred vision, spaz attacks, splitting headaches, mental illness, can't sleep sometimes, more cancer, more birth defects. Oh, it's just a coincidence. We had nothing to do with it, is the official policy. And what caused Gulf War syndrome? I mean, was it the experimental anthrax vaccine we made all the soldiers shoot up with and had never been tested on people before we sent them over there? Or was it that Saddam really did have germ bombs, or it was pollution from all the oil well fires? Or maybe did it have a little bit to do with us using shells coated with depleted uranium, which will go right through the armor of a tank and blow it up from the inside? But then what have you got? Radiation. We left a whole area of Kuwait and Iraq like that. We thought that was such a great idea, we used it in the attacks on Milosevic in Kosovo as well. Hey, we got rid of Slobo and his thugs, and now we've made your land radioactive, Kosovars. Come on back. Don't you want to thank us now? And I fear that after we've blown up and killed every living thing in Afghanistan and Iraq, Osama bin Laden will emerge on the mount from the one cave we forgot about and tell his then mushrooming following, "I told you so." Even if we succeed in wiping out the millions of people who already agree with him, what will their kids be like? What will their children be like? Look no further than how young those kids are throwing rocks at Israeli soldiers. There's your answer. There's got to be a better way. I wish I knew what it was. None of our lives will ever be the same again. I got the word in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, of all places, when a friend of mine from Atlanta woke me up out of some badly needed sleep to ask me if the show at the University of Alabama was going to go on that night. You call me up to ask me that? It's 9 o'clock in the morning. Don't you realize civilized people don't get up till after 2? Haven't you been watching the news? No, I was asleep, man. Well, 2 hijacked planes crashed into the World Trade Center and another hit the Pentagon. Really? Wow. Call you later. I'm going back to bed. Couldn't sleep. So I turned on the TV, and right as the screen came on, there it was, straight across the bottom, World Trade Center destroyed. Both buildings collapse. Then it hit me. Oh, shit. Like the San Francisco earthquake and my sister's death, the true heavy magnitude of the event just avalanched by the hour and wouldn't stop. Of course, the show was canceled, that part of the tour was canceled, no flights out of Alabama. I offered to go on the campus radio station and say a few words if they thought it would help. They did not. My friends from Atlanta called back and offered to make the 3 to 4 hour drive out from Atlanta to Tuscaloosa so we could hang together as the horror continued to unfold. I guess somehow we both knew we needed a friend and needed each other's company, and I'm glad they came. When they got there, one of the first things we thought to ourselves was, so, this is what people go through in other parts of the world, sometimes on a daily basis. Like Israel, where the everyday act of getting on the bus or just sitting down to eat your lunch is risking a death sentence. Or Palestine, or Iraq, where we've never stopped bombing. Or Sarajevo, or Belgrade, Chechnya, Kosovo, Belfast, Oakland. Up till now, we've just been damn lucky. Now we've joined the rest of the world's 21st century of living dangerously. And I'm still amazed that with all the thousands of highly skilled explosives experts trained by our military, we've only had one Timothy McVeigh. It's because we're damn lucky. That's all. And in that little motel room in Tuscaloosa, we observed how the corporate-controlled mass media on the TV were slowly but surely fanning the fires for war. You could tell when they were turning the burner up a little bit by the way the disaster logo would change on the screen. Have you noticed how every scandal or tragedy or disaster instantly has its own logo on television news? Some lucky web geek got the gig to make those up on the spot whenever something really heavy goes down. It started out, America under attack, tragedy in New York, America responds to America's new war, America fights back. Sure enough, the first person I saw on TV openly call for going to war was the Wicked Witch of San Francisco, Senator Dianne Feinstein. And it began to grow from there. There we were, being conditioned as over and over again you'd see the towers explode as the second plane hit the South Tower. Kaboom! The big fireballs. Bang, bang, bang. CNN had collected the most different angles of the second plane going in, and even one of the first plane. Eventually, every time they got a new one, they had to re-show all the other ones they had in the trophy room. Kaboom, kaboom, and again, the Trade Center buildings collapsing silently. Even though in New York City it was so loud it registered on the Richter scale, but on TV, silently, with a little John Tesh-style new agey plinking piano in the background, some sort of sad melancholy tune. You couldn't help but be emotionally affected and want to make the hurt go away and want to find who's responsible and do something about them, get them. And you couldn't help imagine what it was like to be in one of those buildings or be on one of those planes, suddenly finding out you're about to get killed. But we also had to be aware of false images that the corporate-controlled mass media has such a long track record of using when they want to lead lemmings off the cliff into a war where some of their boards of directors can make a lot of money. The first one arousing suspicion right then and there on September 11th was CNN's footage of the celebrating Palestinians dancing in the street because they were supposedly so happy that all those people died when the buildings went down in New York. And some people have alleged that that footage was actually from 1991. Others insist it's not. I have no idea, but it is interesting that the woman in the scarf with the big old Cheshire cat shit-eating grin dancing in the front of the picture had on Peggy Hill glasses, which were pretty far out of vogue even in 1991. The last Gulf War, some of you may remember that there were stories splattered all over the papers and the TV about how the savages in Saddam Hussein's army were storming hospitals in Kuwait and dumping premature babies out of incubators and leaving them to die on the floor as they ran off with the hospital equipment back to Iraq and all. And they trotted out a seemingly shell-shocked young Kuwaiti woman to talk to the media here, and I believe Congress as well, about things are terrible in my country. The Iraqi army is running amok. Please help us save Kuwait for democracy. It turned out the incubator story was planted, and that woman hired by the Hill and Knowlton agency employed by the Kuwaiti royal family to wag the American dog into launching a full-scale war in the Middle East just so they could get their throne back. Democracy be damned. Then again, I think we've always had stuff like this going on. In the early 80s, there was all this hysteria over news reports that a Libyan hit squad had been sent to infiltrate the country to assassinate Ronald Reagan. They even ran sketches of the supposed hit squad in all the papers, which I then wanted to use as a promo photo for Dead Kennedys, but that got vetoed. But later on, they admitted that the whole thing was fiction, and it all came from the fertile mind of a hothead in the White House basement by the name of Oliver North. With that in mind, a piece of me can't help but wonder, and at least ask the question, does Osama bin Laden even exist? We haven't found him yet, have we? And it seems to me that what went down in New York and in D.C. and all the other things they now claim he was responsible for, was it really all done by some evil genius hiding in a cave who supposedly is so sick from kidney disease he needs regular dialysis treatments? Does this mean as we're bombing the caves in Afghanistan, he's running up and down mountains with his dialysis machine, continuing to elude our troops and all? Something doesn't fit here. But by blaming it all on one big evil one, the boogeyman, we've made Osama bin Werewolf an overnight pop star all over the Middle East. They sell candy in Pakistan with his picture on it now. There he is with a little grin and all, and they sell posters in the streets with the buildings going off up above, and you can even call up Osama on screen on your cell phone over there too. Dial it up and there's Osama, and then it morphs into the buildings blowing up and collapsing. Other people see this stuff differently over there, and this is what we've helped inspire. Gulf of Tonkin incident, another example. In 1964, supposedly some North Vietnamese gunboats supposedly fired on some American boats, and that whipped up enough outrage that President Lyndon Johnson was able to ram a resolution through Congress, the Gulf of Tonkin resolution that again hardly anybody voted against because they were scared of being labeled soft on communism, giving President Johnson and the Pentagon, who repeatedly deceived him about the nature of the war, it turns out later, a green light to go into Vietnam and do anything they pleased. What do we get out of that? Almost 60,000 Americans dead. Many, many more, including some of your own parents, scarred for life by that war. Dwarfed by the number of Vietnamese, death toll estimated at 2 to 3 million people, and many, many, many more injured and damaged for life over there. And now, even the corporate media acknowledges as though it's no big deal that for all practical purposes, the Gulf of Tonkin incident didn't happen. Thanks for telling us. We did that at the turn of the last century, too. One ship blows up in a harbor in Cuba and sinks, and then William Randolph Hearst, the one who the Citizen Kane movie was made about, and his granddaughter Patty was kidnapped and now is in John Waters' movies, that Hearst. He was a right-wing newspaper baron. He plastered across all his papers, "Remember the Maine!" That was the name of the ship. "War with Spain! Remember the Maine!" And sure enough, we did. Great excuse to seize the Philippines and Puerto Rico and slaughter 500,000 Filipinos in the process. So with that in mind, what was the Gulf War really about? Oil? Well, I know. I did the Die for Oil Sucker single at the time and all that. But looking back, maybe it wasn't. I mean, what do oil company people care? What do Dick Cheney types care whether or not they're buying their crude from the dictator of Kuwait or the dictator of Iraq? OPEC sets the price, they're going to pay the same regardless. What do they care? So maybe another big reason for that Gulf War was to show off all the fancy new weapons we'd been manufacturing and all. Look at these smart bombs, and these, of course, named the Patriot missiles. And look at these stealth fighter bombers and B-2 bombers and all these new tanks and anti-tank weapons you'll need to blow up those tanks. And they're all for sale. So hey, oil sheiks, hey, dictators and other heads of state, looky here. If you don't buy some of this stuff, someone else will. So is the real Gulf War just an exposition fair to show off new weapons of mass destruction? After all, United States' share of the world arms market after the Gulf War went up from 18% to over 50%. Britain being number 2. And speaking of 1984, have you noticed the repeated warnings that we're going to have another terrorist attack in 5 days? They did that at least twice last fall. The second one was saying that the evil werewolf was going to blow up the malls on Halloween. Didn't happen. Last winter, Ashcrack comes out again. We're going to be attacked again. We've received reliable information, perhaps from Arthur Anderson, that we're going to be attacked again within 5 days. Didn't happen. This time they say, oh, you better watch out this holiday season, or there could be a whole new meaning to Saturday in the park getting bombed on the 4th of July. They claimed it again then. And to make sure everybody was cowering, hiding under their beds from the evil ones and not paying attention to the Patriot Act sailing through Congress and all, 2001, an anthrax odyssey. Never did I think that all I would have to do for entertainment would be to go to the supermarket, look at all the bags of flour, and start laughing. And also in the fine tradition of 1984, Rumsfeld announced we were going to have a Ministry of Truth in the Pentagon, the Office of Strategic Influence, whose purpose would be to plant phony stories in the press and the media in other people's countries, even friendly countries, if we thought it would serve our interest in the short run to do so. And there was enough outcry on that Rumsfeld then announced, okay, we're not going to do it after all. Which story is true? Especially because almost immediately they did announce the opening of the Information Awareness Office in the Pentagon, whose purpose is almost identical to the Office of Strategic Influence, and guess who they hired to run it? How low is this? They hired John Poindexter, arch criminal of the Contragate scandal, right-hand man of Oliver North and all those assassinations and death squad butcher jobs and alleged drug running and all, crack epidemic in South Central that the San Jose Mercury News linked to the Contras and the CIA and all. We thought we'd bring him back again to help fight terrorism. And the Pentagon has even gone into business with Jerry Bruckheimer, the film producer who gave us Black Hawk Down and Top Gun and other classics of the silver screen like Coyote Ugly. He's been hired by the Pentagon to team with this guy named Bertram Van Munster, I kid you not, who supposedly is the brains behind that wonderful show Cops, designed to desensitize people to having their doors kicked down and random searches of cars by the police. Bruckheimer and Van Dun are now producing a so-called reality TV series of our soldiers fighting against the evil ones to be shown on primetime television. And Bruckheimer's come right out and said, we want it to be a recruiting tool for the military. And it's interesting, though, that all these war movies that have come out all of a sudden, these propaganda movies, Black Hawk Down, Pearl Harbor, Behind Enemy Lines, more, 3 new TV shows about the CIA all at once, all portraying them in a positive light, which is not an easy thing to do. Those movies and shows were first in production when Clinton was still president. And the Pentagon has also hired a PR firm called the Rendon Group to teach them how to spin the war on terrorism better, so we'll keep lapping it up and coming back for more. But some of these things that started on September 11th in the media reports still don't make sense to me. Did those guys really take over those planes with box cutters and plastic knives? If I was a professional airline pilot and some lunatics burst into my cabin with box cutters and plastic knives and told me to fly the plane into the World Trade Center and kill everybody, I'd at least consider beating the crap out of them first. And imagine how disappointed some of the spin-neisters were when, since we can't find Osama bin Laden, prepare for the big show trial of the great evil one, the traitor John Walker Lind. What if Lind went up on the stand and said, "Yo, I thought I was in an episode of Survivor and I'm the only one here. Where's my $1 million, man?" I went overseas 5 days after September 11th, and I couldn't believe the contrast in the mass media coverage of September 11th and what led up to it, and terrorism in general and the war over there, in contrast to what there was over here. I've joked for years that our media has become so dumbed down that it's not that much different from Pravda, the old Soviet Union daily newspaper that the communists put out that gave you 8 pages a day of all the government thought you should know. Well, we're there, folks. We get bombarded with more information, but bombarding people with too much information, most of it useless, is just as good a way of controlling a society as depriving them of information. Instead, what do we get? Oh my God, human cloning! What are we going to do about human cloning? For some reason, that doesn't worry me. I think we've had human cloning as long as we've been alive. It's called the U.S. public school system. But over there, I found out so many things, and when I came back here, I thought everybody else knew this stuff too, or had read about it or something. People are going, "What? What? I never heard about that. That couldn't have happened, could it?" Over there, even some of the mainstream straight daily papers like The Independent and especially The Guardian in Britain, which you can read on their website at www.guardian.co.uk, all kinds of interesting things in there, including not one but 2 reports that there was an informal diplomatic meeting in July of 2001, the summer before September 11th, in a Berlin hotel room. America was there, Soviet Union was there, Iran, Pakistan, Northern Alliance, Taliban invited but declined to attend. And according to The Guardian, the American diplomatic representatives said, "Hey, we're getting ready to invade Afghanistan and take out Osama bin Laden." And he didn't seem to care if the Pakistani representative took this back to the Taliban, which The Guardian claimed he did. Thought that was interesting. Other things that were common knowledge over there but not over here was that a chartered Saudi airliner was allowed to come into this country and pick up other members of the bin Laden family to get them safely back to Saudi Arabia right after September 11th. The FBI wasn't too amused about that. And how many of you know that the Bush family and the bin Laden family have a business relationship going back about 25 years? One of King George's first business partners when he was still a princeling back in 1979 in his first business venture, Arbusto Energy, was none other than Salem bin Laden, older brother of Osama by 1 year. And there's also this company called the Carlyle Group that King George Bush I still works for. And it's headed by Frank Carlucci, Contragate criminal, and one of the defense secretaries in the Reagan-Bush years. He's on there. Other people on the board of directors include James Baker, Bush I's Secretary of State and political dirty trick specialist who helped fix the Florida elections for Georgie Jr. later on. He's on board. Who else? Fidel Ramos, old president of the Philippines, is involved. John Major, who succeeded Margaret Thatcher as conservative prime minister of England, he's involved. And what the Carlyle Group does is they're the 11th largest defense contractor in the United States now. They don't really make anything. They buy up other companies, floundering manufacturers of weapons of mass destruction, put them on their feet financially and either sell them off or hang on to them before they move on to another host. They're moving into other consumer technology and some media outlets overseas. Another person involved with Carlyle is King George Bush I, who to this day makes speeches on Carlyle's behalf for $800,000 in Carlyle stock per appearance. And guess who else made speeches for Carlyle before he got in the new Bush administration? Colin Powell. And guess who else had millions invested in Carlyle before they pulled it out in October? The Bin Laden family. Going back to September 11th, another interesting one was all the different networks, they all had their news going all day, and I was flipping from channel to channel and surfing in between, and CBS seemed to be about the best in terms of what passes for quality these days with corporate news. CNN behind them, and then rock bottom was Fox News. Gee, what a surprise. Tell me, retarded punditoid number 6, how does this compare to the Monica Lewinsky scandal? Will this take America's attention off of Chandra Levy? They were thinking deep on this one. It was also interesting to watch the expert witness follies, where the networks, to outscoop each other quickly, gathered up all these people from past administrations, Republican for the most part. They got Kissinger on there. They got his proteges like Lawrence Eagleburger somehow ribbiting and croaking away in toad-like fashion, and other people on there. And it was interesting what came out of their mouths when they got shoved onto TV so quickly that they didn't get everything cleared with the spin doctors and official channels first. For example, James Woolsey, Clinton's first director of the CIA, they had him on TV looking like Yoda in a really bad mood. Yeah, well, the FBI and the grand jury had given us at the CIA the information they had on the 1993 World Trade Center bombing at the time. We could have spent all these years tracking these people down, taking care of them, so to speak, and this kind of thing might never have happened. In other words, all these different intelligence agencies we spent hundreds of billions of dollars on, I think we have 13 of them now, they fight with each other. They don't even get along. They don't even work together. They have prima donna hissy fits with each other instead. It's all run around the musical chairs with the Keystone Spies or something. All these documents they dredged up from the apartments of the people they went after for the 1993 bombings, talking about other ways to take out buildings with planes and everything, but nobody bothered to translate them because they couldn't find any Arabic translators. Finally, late in the day, King George II finally comes back on the TV to reassure us all is well, looking even more like a deer caught in the headlights than usual. I mean, have you noticed that no matter how they package him, he still gives off this vibe like he knows he doesn't belong where he is? My first exposure to him was when he gave his acceptance speech at the Republican convention in Philadelphia in summer of 2000, and there he was, looking like a rich college frat boy trying to get on the debate team, standing behind this podium that looked too big for him.
We're going to make America strong and America proud. I'll restore honesty and dignity to the White House.
And then he came right out and said on national television,
"Don't mess with Texas."
I hope that's not what this war is really about. But September 11th, we're hearing, where's George? Where's George? He's in Louisiana. No. We took him up to hide him in Nebraska from the big bad werewolf. And we were thinking, no. He's up in the Bush family palace in Kennebunkport, Maine.
Hey, Pop, you told me this job was going to be easy. What do I do now?
I can't believe some of the stuff that comes out of that guy's mouth, and he gets away with it. I mean, in the endless war that's supposed to go on and on like the ever-ready rabbit, look who we've put in charge. This is the guy who on the campaign trail called people from Greece Grecians, Kosovians, called Jimmy Carter a European-style socialist, and thought Friends was a movie and the Taliban were a rock band. Yeah, he was asked what his favorite book was that influenced him the most, and he refused to say. Finally, he realized people wouldn't take that for an answer, so he cited a children's book that he said influenced him a lot when he was a little kid. Turned out that book was published in '66 when he was already in college. Then he was asked how he thought things would go with Prime Minister Poutine in Canada. And he went on and on about what great friends they were. They'd known each other for years. They got along fabulously. The trouble is, that's not the name of the Prime Minister of Canada. It's Jean Chrétien. Poutine is a weird, creamy potato dish they serve in Eastern Canada, and Bush didn't know the difference. And he calls himself the education president, says he's going to fix our schools. And Laura, his wife, who has one hell of an evil pair of eyes, if you've ever looked at her carefully. She says that her do-good project for being first lady is going to be literacy and education, maybe because of what snores on the other side of the bed. I don't know.
Rarely is the question asked, is our children learning? I will have a foreign-handed foreign policy.
Here's what he knew about the Middle East.
It is clear our nation is reliant on big foreign oil. More and more of our imports come from overseas.
Oh, yes. I think this is an abortion quote. I'm not sure.
It is important for us to explain to our nation that life is important. It's not only life of babies, but life of children living in, the dark dungeons of the internet. Families is where our nation finds hope, where wings take dream.
Around the time that came out of his mouth, his spin meisters realized people were starting to see that this guy was so dumb he made Dan Quayle look like Einstein. They're saying, no. You're picking on the disabled when you make fun of that. The guy's dyslexic. Give him a break. And I mean no harm against anybody dyslexic. There's at least 2 in my extended family, and they've been through hell because of it. But should we have somebody who may see things in mirror image or backwards have his finger on all the buttons of weapons of mass destruction?
Hey, Dick, hey, Condoleezza Rummy, hey, come here. Look at all these buttons I found over here in the corner. Well, let's see what they do. Let's see what I push this one.
You just launched nuclear missiles at China, sir.
Oh, well, we have business over there, don't we? Yeah, let me see if I can bring them back. I'll push this button.
You just pushed the buttons so they can't be called back, sir.
Really? That's too bad. Let's go watch some baseball. Will the highways on the internet become more few? I know how hard it is for you to put food on your family.
I haven't had this much fun with creative mutilation of the English language. Not even since Japanese hardcore have I had this much fun. This goes all the way back to my sophomore year in high school, where I had this geometry teacher whose parents were from Norway, but he was from Minnesota. And he had the exact same accent as all the characters in the Fargo movie. And big baggy Charlie Chaplin pants and a flannel hunting shirt, often with a white shirt with a skinny tie underneath in the middle of the bell-bottom 70s, and a disproportionately small head with wavy widow's peak hair on top. Started out slow, seemed like just a boring math class initially, but then one day, now, we're talking about the angle CAB. Excuse me, B. Angle, dwi. Boy, am I having a time today. And then it grew and grew and grew. And luckily, me and a friend in an earlier class period had started writing down his quotes. And by the end of the year, the notebook was 1.5 inches thick. Things like, well, this is what happened one day to congruent triangles. Now, we working with Klangagi Trubers. No, 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 no. Congruent triangulars, congruent triangles, congruent, drop, grab, where was there? Excuse me, Oh yes, triangulars, no, tringlers. Oh no, triurglars. Oh, I can't even try. Failing grade became this one day. We gabba bake. Our nabberness clonks, dap, cards. But all I got was a flailing grood. Oh, flabby grab, me bonk winkerbean, failing grunt. Grape, grade. Lassie, bottomless Negro. And then the Freudian slips about food, sex, and Watergate began. Do fluorescent lights save energy? Well, it depends a lot on the boobs, or blobs, or bulbs that you use. Finally, one day, he comes out and asks the class, Oberdiampus blabby dwerp. Not one English word left in the entire sentence. Finally, in Oslo, about a year ago, I got to ask a group of people, okay, is this really Norwegian? No. Nor is asking the class, poofy snibble abby glob, Norwegian either. Wimpy hamburglers, yep. Scoozy pimple, need eat less ink breakfast. So flounder radius sphere, laxative, gorge porky nog, glurp, in me mob, no! Bush. I'm going to expand child care even to those who don't have children. It's clearly a budget. It's got a lot of numbers in it. This is our president, folks. He goes to Quebec City for the FTAA, that evil trade treaty meeting, and he says, no, there's not going to be a press conference today. Not in English, not in French, not in Mexican. After September 11th, he goes over to England and meets the child prodigy singing star Charlotte Church. And what does he say to her? But so, what state is Wales in? I said, it's a separate country next to England. And he went, oh, okay. I didn't know what to say.
What I am against is quotas. I am against hard quotas. Quotas, they basically delineate based upon whatever. However they delineate quotas, I think, vulcanize society. So I don't know how that fits into what everybody else is saying, their relative positions, but that's my position.
Somehow this guy got buttered and squirted through Yale. Maybe because he came from a good family with a nasty reputation. I don't know. Don't know how he made it through there, but they brought him back to Yale in 2001 to give the commencement address to the graduating class. And what advice does he have for them?
And to the C students, I say, you too can be President of the United States.